Hi everyone, so today we are drawing everything we have learned about conservatism together to answer a practice exam question. So here is the question that we're going to be looking at. So to what extent is conservatism a coherent ideology? Clearly this question is asking us to compare and contrast all the different ideas in conservatism. We'll break down this question later. First, I just want to go through some of the core content that could be useful for this question. So we're going to compare and contrast the different strands and thinkers. So how is conservatism coherent, i.e. there are lots of similarities in the ideas that they have, and then how is it not coherent or incoherent, where there are lots of different ideas that are perhaps contrasting with each other. So we're going to start with the tensions, so how they are perhaps different. So the first sort of area you can talk about is human nature. Remember, there are four key areas: human nature, the state, society, and the economy. So within human nature, we can point to traditional conservatives that take a skeptical view of human nature, arguing that grand utopian visions of society lead to problems, such as the French Revolution. So our traditional conservatives believe that we shouldn't really have these visions about what society should look like. We should actually try to work with what we have and focus on pragmatic change, focus on the here and now. On the other hand, our new right thinkers are more optimistic, and they think that individuals have great potential. So Nozick and Rand think that capitalist economy encourages human flourishment. You can also point to the arguments about human nature in terms of what we are innately like. So Hobbes described the state of nature as nasty, brutish, and short, because he believed humans are naturally selfish, they're distrustful of each other, and they're likely to be destructive. On the other hand, you can compare this to Oakeshott, who believed that humans are fallible but not terrible. So remember, fallible means they're likely to fail, or they're imperfect but they're not immoral. So they're not perfect human beings. They're likely to fail, they're likely to make mistakes, but they are not inherently bad people. So this shows a tension between Hobbes and Oakeshott. We can then move on to society. So you can use Burke's ideas about society being made up of small communities, or little platoons, as he called them. And these little platoons are overseen by a hierarchical structure where a paternalistic elite tries to ensure the smooth running of society by being nobles that look after those that are less fortunate. So you can use that concept, noblesse oblige, there. You can contrast this with the new right, because they think society is made up of atomistic individuals rather than small communities. And they think that all individuals are striving for their own success. You can use Thatcher's quote here. She once famously said, "There is no such thing as society. There are individual men and women and their families." And this demonstrates this idea. Obviously, Margaret Thatcher is not one of the five key thinkers, but you can throw in other additional thinkers to show off your knowledge and understanding where you can. You can also look at the traditional conservatives' view that society emerges and develops organically, and those in power are there due to their inherited status. And they think that actually that those being there because of their inherited status is a good thing, because they have, passed down a wealth of knowledge and experience through the generations. And so if you're in a position of power because you've inherited it, you're likely to have a good understanding of how to rule, or how to manage people, or manage society. So they think that this is a good thing. Also, they think, it's good that society develops organically, slowly, that idea of change to conserve, because they don't think radical change is a good thing, because it can lead to too much rapid change, which can lead to an unstable society. New right thinkers, on the other hand, argue that status should be based on achieved status and meritocracy rather than inherited status. So remember that term meritocracy means, you achieve something based on merit, so how hard you've worked, rather than, because you've inherited it from somebody else. We can then also talk about the state. So traditional conservatives believe the state is controlled by those that are born to rule and have a responsibility to rule due to their inherited knowledge and experience, as we just said. And One Nation conservatives take this a bit further, and they're supportive of an enlarged state in the name of preserving one nation and to ensure social stability. So actually having a larger role for the state isn't necessarily a bad thing if it ensures social solidarity, because if you've got social solidarity, you're not going to have radical change and instability. On the other hand, the New Right are very much against the expansion of the state and wish to roll back the state. They argue that an enlarged state leads to dependency culture. So a dependency culture is when individuals are dependent on the state for handouts, for benefits, for services, and they believe that this is a bad thing because it strips people of their individualism and therefore stripping them of the means to flourish. They're also against the idea of aristocratic rule or rule based on inheritance, and they favour rule based on merit, as we mentioned earlier. Then we've got the economy. So traditional conservatives advocate managed capitalism because free market capitalism is unpredictable and can lead to social stability. One Nation conservatives are sceptical of global capitalism because it leads to international interconnectedness, which can undermine the national identity. If we're getting, one of the things that people talk about often is cars. The UK used to have a very big car manufacturing industry, but then because of globalization, lots of that was perhaps taken over by other countries, and perhaps weakened the sense of national identity around car manufacturing. There's lots of other industries, the textiles industry, steel making industry, etc., that were once sort of part of national pride, and because they've now been exported around the world, it undermines national identity, according to One Nation conservatives. So therefore, they advocate Keynesian economic policies. So that means higher taxes, higher public spending, a sort of version of strongly managed capitalism. On the other hand, the New Right are pro-capitalism and laissez-faire free market economies, as they help to promote individualism. As a result, they argue that privatised, deregulated economies are best. Low levels of tax, low levels of state spending. If you're taxing someone quite highly, arguably you're taking away their individualism because you're not allowing them to choose how they spend their earnings. You're commandeering some of that through tax and choosing what to spend it on. And it might not even necessarily benefit that person. A lot of people that pay high tax, like if you think about people that go to private school, parents that pay tuition fees for private schools, feel annoyed that their taxes are spent on state schools as well, because they feel like they're paying for something twice almost. So it feels like their individualism, their right to direct where their money is spent, is taken away from them. So there is a lot of information there, lots of tensions. You would not necessarily talk about all of these in this question. So you really want in 2 paragraphs on how it's not a coherent ideology, how there are tensions actually. So you wouldn't necessarily talk about 1 paragraph for human nature. Even in that paragraph on human nature, there's a lot of information there. You wouldn't necessarily have both of those things because you want to take 1 or 2 ideas and expand on them. So this is just all of the information that you could potentially include. And you'll also notice, as I was going through that there were some things that overlapped. So, obviously you don't want to repeat yourself. So choose wisely what you include for those 2 paragraphs to show that conservatism has lots of tensions within it. So next, I want you to do exactly the same as what I've just done, but for the similarities. I've given you a Get Revising page here that has a grid, and it has a grid with the similarities on it. So use that to help you sort of figure out what the other side of the debate is. So what are the similarities? I'm sure you know loads already, but that's there to help you. The other thing that you should obviously use, I mentioned some of the key thinkers that you could use in there. I didn't mention Rand and Nozick too much. Obviously, they would go into the New Right section. So remember, you've got to use 2 of the 5 at least. Here's a very brief summary of what they say about each of the 4 key areas. Now, this is obviously not everything they believe. They've written entire books, several books each on these issues. and there's only a sentence for each one. So obviously use it as a guide. If you can't quite remember roughly what they say, look at this first, and then use the online textbook and the pre-tuned videos that you've watched and last week's lesson to help you incorporate their ideas into your essay. Obviously, you can use all of them. I would say the most important thing is that you're not just name dropping them. It's always good to use quotes. So there's, lots of quotes that we've mentioned previously in the previous PowerPoint and also on the pre-tuned site. So let's break down this question a little bit more before you go off and write it. So the command word is to what extent. So that's obviously a measurement. Is it greatly a coherent ideology? Is it completely a coherent ideology? Is it a coherent ideology to a minimal degree? Don't just put to a certain extent. What extent do you mean? So as you're going through, your link back to the question or reference back to the question part should say, this shows that conservatism is a very coherent or is minimally coherent. Use those evaluative words to measure the extent. So the structure of the essay, ideally you want it is coherent, it isn't coherent, it is coherent, it isn't coherent. That kind of backwards and forwards helps you to create a sense of debate, because that's what an essay is. It's a debate, isn't it? You're trying to look at two sides of an argument and come to some sort of judgment, in each paragraph, but also B, at the end of the essay when you write your conclusion. So what does the word coherent mean? So obviously you can just do a little dictionary lookup of that, but coherent in this sense, we're talking about, does it completely flow from one end to the other? If someone is incoherent, it usually means they're talking nonsense. In this regard, what it's essentially saying, it's a sort of roundabout way of saying, to what extent do they all agree with each other? Do they all have the same ideas or different ideas or contrasting ideas? The types of conservatism, obviously you want to incorporate traditional, one nation and the new right. The themes, remember we said, are the four themes: the economy, the state, society and human nature. And remember, you need 2 of those 5 key thinkers, but you can use additional ones too. If you could please write this up. If you want to write a plan and email me the plan, and I'll comment on the plan before you write it, that's absolutely fine. If you get stuck and you don't understand some of the concepts or ideas or thinkers, please email me and I will help you. That's all. Thanks very much. Bye.